I've always been a huge fan of electronic music, and one day I started to wonder, where did it all start? And it turns out, it's a great story. Welcome to the channel, by the way. I'm Mixed Up, and today we're diving into the origins of electronic music and how it evolved into the sounds we know today. While electronic music's roots go further back, we'll start in the 60s, where the modern story really begins.
The 1960s were a time of incredible change, and the world was buzzing with new ideas and a thirst for experimentation. And in the midst of all this, a new sound is emerging: electronic music. One of the biggest game changers was the invention of the Moog synthesizer, building on earlier advancements like the theremin. Before the Moog, synthesizers were these gigantic room-filling machines, not exactly convenient for musicians. But Robert Moog changed everything. He created a synthesizer that was smaller, more portable, and allowed musicians to create sounds unlike anything heard before. It was like having an entire orchestra at your fingertips, and you could actually move it. Composers like Wendy Carlos were among the first to truly explore Moog's potential. Her album Switched on Bach was a revelation. It was an album containing classical music by Bach played in its entirety on synth. It blew people's minds and helped bring electronic music into the mainstream. It wasn't just classical music getting a makeover. It found its way into pop, rock, and even film scores, giving them a futuristic and experimental edge. Bands like the Beatles and composers like John Carpenter were amongst the first to incorporate electronic sounds into their work. But the Moog wasn't alone. Electronic music gained momentum, and other instruments like the Buchla synth began to appear, giving musicians more sounds to explore. They were experimenting with tape loops and drum machines, basically inventing new ways to make music. This would set the stage for electronic music to truly take flight in the decades to come.
The 1970s saw a wave of musical innovation, with electronic sounds at the forefront. Synthesizers became more accessible and affordable, allowing musicians to create even more complex and diverse electronic music.
A key development was the arrival of portable synths like the Mini Moog. This made electronic sounds more accessible for studios and live performances. The 1970s also saw the rise of disco, a genre that got defined by the grooves and rhythms of the synthesizer. Disco clubs became popular gathering places for people to dance and enjoy the new sounds. Artists like Kraftwerk, with their robotic rhythms and futuristic sounds, laid the groundwork for electronic dance music. Donna Summer, with her disco anthem I Feel Love, produced by Giorgio Moroder, brought electronic music to the mainstream. Meanwhile, Isao Tomita explored electronic music's artistic potential, blending classical compositions with otherworldly synthesizer sounds to create something entirely new. These artists, along with many others, demonstrated the incredible range of sounds that could be created with electronic music. From the experimental and ambient to the catchy and danceable, the 1970s saw a wide variety of electronic styles emerge.
The 1970s was a pivotal decade for electronic music. It saw the rise of new technologies, the emergence of influential artists, and the development of various subgenres. With the dawn of the disco ball, the electronic music was about to find its groove. Cheers. Yeah. Get ready for big hair, shoulder pads, and synthesizer galore. The 80s were a decade of bold sounds and technological leaps in electronic music.
Now we had all these electronic instruments, but we're still missing one very important thing: a way for these instruments to communicate. Enter the MIDI, a technology that allowed communication between electronic instruments. Now it was easier than ever to create complex arrangements and synchronize different devices. This revolutionized studio setups. MIDI made it possible to control multiple instruments from one keyboard or sequencer and opened the door for electronic music production. Samplers also became popular, allowing musicians to record and manipulate a range of sounds from a drum hit to a bird song and then loop it, change its pitch, and totally transform it. And let's not forget those iconic drum machines like the Roland TR-808 and TR-909, which gave us those classic electronic drum sounds that still dominate today. These advancements fueled an explosion of new sounds. Synthpop bands like Depeche Mode and New Order brought electronic music to the mainstream, while pioneers like Afrika Bambaataa and Arthur Baker laid the foundation for hip-hop and electronic dance music. House music emerged in Chicago and techno in Detroit, underground scenes led by innovative DJs and producers that would soon become global phenomena. The 80s were times where electronic music truly came into its own. It was a decade of bold sounds, groundbreaking technology, and the rise of genres that continue to shape electronic music today. But the evolution didn't stop there. As the 80s gave way to the 90s, electronic music was about to enter a new era, one of massive raves, underground scenes, and global subcultures. Hold on tight, because the 90s were a wild, wild ride for electronic music. This was a decade of rave culture, where massive parties and underground scenes brought people together by a shared love for pulsating beats and hypnotic sounds. Electronic music splintered into a million subgenres. Trance transported listeners to euphoric realms with its soaring melodies. Techno pounded through underground clubs with its dark industrial rhythms, and drum and bass emerged with its rapid beats and intricate bass lines, pushing the boundaries of rhythm and sound design. This was the era of legendary artists and groups like The Prodigy, The Chemical Brothers, and Fatboy Slim. Their innovative sounds and electrifying live performances captivated audiences worldwide and pushed electronic music further into the mainstream. Meanwhile in France, Daft Punk began blending house, funk, and techno. This mix of genres would soon be known as French house. But the 90s weren't just about raves and big beats. Electronica artists like Aphex Twin and Boards of Canada explored more experimental and ambient sounds, creating intricate sonic landscapes that challenged the very definition of electronic music. The 90s were a time of incredible creativity and diversity in electronic music. From massive raves to intimate listening experiences, electronic sounds was in every corner of the music world.
As the 90s came to a close, and the world was dancing to the beats of 1,000 raves, the stage was set for a new era. The rise of digital audio workstations, or DAWs for short, was about to make music production more accessible than ever, and the internet would soon connect artists and fans in ways people at this time never could fathom. The 2000s were a time of massive technological change, and electronic music was at the forefront. Earlier DAWs had been very experimental, but with more powerful and affordable computers and modern tools like Logic Pro, FL Studio, and Ableton Live, they took the center stage, allowing anyone to create studio-quality music from their bedrooms.
And let's not forget about the internet. Online platforms like SoundCloud emerged, allowing artists to share their music directly with fans and collaborate with other musicians across the globe. This created a whole new level of connectivity and creativity in the electronic music world. Daft Punk, who we met in the 90s, reached new heights of fame with their album Discovery and its iconic animated film Interstellar 5555. Deadmau5 brought his unique blend of progressive house and techno to the world.
The 2000s brought accessibility in electronic music. DAWs empowered a new generation of producers, the internet connected artists and fans like never before, and the electronic music landscape was shifting. Fresh sounds were brewing and entirely new subgenres was on the horizon, ready to redefine the scene in the years to come. Get ready to party! The early 2010s were an explosion of electronic dance music, or EDM as it became known. Massive festivals like Tomorrowland and Ultra Music Festival drew hundreds of thousands of fans, transforming electronic music into a global phenomenon.
This was the era of superstar DJs like Skrillex, Avicii, and Swedish House Mafia. Skrillex's signature dubstep sound and aggressive bro-step drops brought raw energy to the dance floor, while Avicii's anthemic progressive house and Swedish House Mafia's legendary live shows filled stadiums worldwide. EDM wasn't just confined to clubs and festivals. It crossed over into the pop charts with producers like David Guetta and Calvin Harris collaborating with major stars like Rihanna and Sia. The early 2010s were a time of huge mainstream success for electronic music. It was a cultural phenomenon, a lifestyle, and a soundtrack for a generation. But as the decade progressed, the electronic music landscape began to shift. While EDM remained popular, the scene started to diversify, with new sounds and subgenres emerging from the underground scene. By 2015, EDM had dominated the global music scene for nearly a decade. Festivals like Tomorrowland and Ultra Music Festival still drew massive crowds, but their place at the top was beginning to fade. Hip-hop, which had been gaining momentum throughout the 2010s, was now stepping into the spotlight. Artists like Travis Scott, Post Malone and Lil Uzi Vert blended trap beats with electronic elements, creating a fresh, energetic sound that captured the attention of a new generation. At the same time, the underground electronic scene began to shift. Genres like future bass, lo-fi house and vaporwave gained traction, offering a more laid-back, experimental alternative to EDM festival anthems. Producers like Flume, Odessa, and Porter Robinson pushed the boundaries, crafting melodic, atmospheric tracks that felt intimate and reflective, far from the thumping bass drops of EDM's peak. Meanwhile, technology made music production more accessible. Digital audio workstations were now accessible to bedroom producers armed with just laptop and software, leading to an explosion of new sounds. Genres like hyperpop and experimental synthwave emerged, each carving out their own niche in electronic music's ever-expanding universe. But electronic music didn't disappear from the mainstream. Instead, its influence evolved. Artists like The Weeknd and Billie Eilish blended dark, atmospheric electronic elements with pop, creating some of the most defining tracks of the late 2010s and early 2020s. EDM may no longer dominate the charts, but its legacy and sound continues to shape the future.
From the peaks of EDM to the rise of hip-hop and experimental genres, the story of electronic music is a constant evolution. And as we move forward, one thing is for sure. Electronic music will always find new ways to innovate, surprise, and evolve. That was all for today. Goodbye. Oh, yeah.